If you hang around the filmmaking corners of the internet much, you might have heard the advice, gear doesn't matter, repeated over and over again. But is that really true? This idea usually comes from a good place, but I'm gonna take a controversial stance here and say that this is actually pretty bad advice. I've been working full-time in the documentary industry for over 10 years now, and based on my experience, gear does matter, even if you're not on multi-million-dollar productions like the one I'm shooting right now. So in this video, I'm gonna break down why paying attention to gear is critical for documentary filmmakers, then touch on what I think people really mean when they say gear doesn't matter, and then wrap up with some tips on how we as filmmakers can find a healthy relationship with gear. I can already feel the internet's rage storm brewing in the comments, but we're gonna do this anyways, so let's get into it. So before I get going here, I'm still working up in the Arctic, so for the next couple of months, I'm away from my office, which means the audio and lighting are not gonna be quite as nice as I'm used to, but since I'm a working DP and not a full-time YouTuber, if I wanna keep making these videos every week, this is just the reality I have to work with. And secondly, yes, this is the faint hint of a mustache here at the moment, but it's mostly for fun to celebrate the official launch of the show I'm working on, and it's probably gonna come off soon. Though, if enough people in the comments tell me to keep it, I just might think about it. Okay, so right now I am sitting in a dark corner of the gear room for a big budget doc TV show that I can't really name for legal reasons, and there is an absolute crap ton of gear going on in here. And I do know that before we get into this, most people out there aren't working on huge shows like this that often, and when I shoot my own personal films, I definitely don't have access to even a fraction of the amount of stuff that's in here. The point of this video isn't to tell you that you need 65 Pelican cases to be considered a real filmmaker, but I am hoping to change your mind about thinking that gear doesn't matter. And before I forget, something non-gear related that matters for filmmakers who need music for their projects, the sponsor of today's video is Audiio, but more on them later. I think what people mean when they say gear doesn't matter is that you should never let gear stop you from actually going out and making something. A much better way to give out this advice might be, don't let gear stop you from starting, or don't buy gear you can't afford. But to say it doesn't matter is just plain wrong. Gear is just another word for the professional tools you use to get a job done. And while, yes, you probably can build a house with only a hammer and a saw if you take your time and really know what you're doing, there's a reason why contractors usually bring a whole van worth of stuff with them. If gear truly didn't matter, then shows like Last Chance U wouldn't fill an entire parking lot on shoot day, and Michael Jordan's interview in The Last Dance would only have a single camera angle instead of 5 or 6. Having more tools at your disposal means that you can get very specific looks that help to tell your story more effectively, and knowing how and when to use those tools properly is really important. Now don't get me wrong here, I'm definitely not saying that you need to own all this stuff or even a fraction of it to tell an amazing story. You can do absolutely incredible work with small teams, and if I had to pick between the mentality of thinking you can buy your way into a career through gear or owning so little that it all fits into a carry-on backpack, I'd prefer the carry-on option for sure. But if your goal is to be the best possible visual storyteller and maybe even have a full-time career in this business, then you're gonna wanna understand how this stuff works so that you can use it to tell your story. Gear won't make your story better, that's not what I'm saying, but if you know how to use it well, it will help you to tell that story more intentionally. Okay, so let's get out of this room for a second and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so I'm just hiking through the bush now with this gigantic Kessler Dolly second shooter thing, and I absolutely hate it. I'll be honest, my basic position with things like this is that it's dumb, and it's not worth the hassle. It's enormous, it weighs an incredible amount, and it's just a giant pain every time I have to take it out. But I still take it out, and I know how, more importantly. Hold on, let me set this down before I talk anymore. This is killing me. Okay, that's way better. If you really disagree with me and my opinion on sliders, feel free to let me know in the comments. But anyways, like I was saying, even though I don't ever want to own one of these myself, I still understand how to use it effectively so that when I'm on a big job like this and the director wants slider shots in the middle of the bush, I can step in and do it. And the reality of a career in filmmaking is that most of us spend our time working on other people's projects more than we do our own so that we can make a living. So even if I wouldn't shoot this way myself and I kind of curse this thing every time I have to
use it, I'm definitely not going to tell the director no when he asks for these shots. The same thing goes for gimbals and follow focuses and wireless monitors and complex audio systems, tandem drone operations, big lighting setups, GoPro rigging, timecode workflows, and a whole bunch of other stuff that I find to be a hassle most of the time, but that really do enable a bunch of creative possibilities. And since what you're shooting should be in service of the story, knowing how to use all the tools at your disposal to tell the best story possible is part of your job as a filmmaker. And while I think about it, something else that's part of your job as a filmmaker is to find the right music for your projects, and that's the perfect opportunity to talk about the sponsor of this video, Audiio. Man, that was a good transition. Finding music to use in my films and videos has been a constant struggle since I first started shooting over a decade ago now. And that's where services like Audiio have stepped in to fill the demand, giving you access to thousands and thousands of songs and tens of thousands of sound effects that you can use in your films or YouTube videos without worrying about getting sued. And on top of that, it's also been the best deal for something like this that I've ever found, because for viewers of this channel who use the code Luke70 at checkout, you'll save an insane 70% on their Pro plan, which brings the price down to just $59. They're also selling an entire lifetime membership bundle, which is an incredible deal, and most of these services don't give you lifetime options. So I'm guessing and I'm betting that Audiio is just going to keep growing and growing and growing. So buying in now and saving yourself all that money on a lifetime membership, you're going to get the best possible deal. If you've ever shopped around for services like this, you'll know that that's around a quarter of what it would normally cost. So if you need music and you don't want to get sued, Audiio is an absolute no-brainer. Plus, you'll be supporting me and the channel at the same time, so everybody wins. Okay, let's tear this thing down and go back inside because it's freezing out here.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to gear, we should be able to confidently use whatever tool we need in order to tell the best possible story. That doesn't mean running out to buy a motion control slider or picking up an FX9 tomorrow. What I mean is that you should be able to use this stuff and then decide on a case-by-case basis what you need. Or to put it another way, you should know all the rules before you start to break them. So if you decide to go off and shoot your next feature with a mirrorless and a single prime lens, that's great, and I bet it's gonna look fantastic. But I want that decision to be made because you've thought it through and decided that you don't need lighting, grip, or multiple lav mics, instead of just having the decision made for you because you don't know how to use that stuff and you don't want to learn. And I'm just gonna say it one more time, I'm not suggesting you go out and buy tens of thousands of dollars worth of gear, because that is not the answer. It's never the answer. Cartel Land, which I mention constantly on this channel, was mainly shot with a Canon 17 to 55mm lens and a single camera, and it's one of the best stocks ever made, and it was nominated for an Oscar. But I know the DP Matt Porwall, and even though he used a minimal kit out of circumstance, he did that because it made sense for the job. Matt has a deep technical knowledge of pretty much every tool out there, and if you go search his name on YouTube, you can find everything from comprehensive diffusion cloth tests to super in-depth cinema zoom comparisons. He didn't pick a minimalist kit because that's all he knew. He did it because it made sense for that story. Buying gear will never be the answer to telling better stories, but at the same time, pretending that it's not important because a YouTuber made a video about how gear doesn't matter is not the way to master your craft, in my opinion. And as I say that, I do realize that I'm also just a guy on YouTube telling you what to do, so who knows, maybe you should just ignore me too. Like and subscribe. So what does a healthy relationship to gear look like? Well, maybe it doesn't exist, but in an ideal world, I think it means trying to get comfortable with as many of the filmmaking tools as you can, and then picking the ones you think you're going to need to serve your story the best from an informed place. For me personally, when I notice that there's something I'm not good at using, I'll try to set up a small shoot and rent that gear for the day and then get better at it. Like a few years ago, I had a client ask me for work samples showing camera and dolly movement, and I realized that I didn't really have much experience with that kind of stuff. So I rented a dolly and a smoke machine and bribed a friend with a case of beer for an afternoon. And when I wrapped, I had a 60-second spec ad and a much better handle on how to use dolly moves effectively. I haven't needed to use one since, but if I needed to, I could, and that's the whole point. So maybe think about renting out some weird things for a day or two. A lot of rental houses have weekend pricing, meaning that if you pick something up on a Friday afternoon, you don't have to bring it back till Monday and you only pay for one day. So it can be a cheap way of getting your hands on some decent gear, like maybe an Easy Rig or an Inspire 2 or a wireless follow focus or something that you don't normally have access to. Create a reason for yourself to get to know that tool and then ignore it for the rest of your career if you want, but at least you'll know why. So yeah, gear does matter. At least it does if you really want to master this stuff at a high level and maybe even turn it into a full-time career. Pretending it doesn't is sort of willfully ignoring part of the job. Do you need to have a room like this one full of camera gear to tell good stories? No, not by a long shot. Story is still king, and no amount of gear will make up for a bad story. My personal philosophy is to bring as much gear as needed, but as little as possible. If I need a transport truck to carry it all, then so be it. If I can do it with a single backpack, great. But please, let's stop pretending it doesn't matter, even if it makes for good thumbnails. See ya.